Thank you. So welcome everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming out. I was hoping maybe we would get a rainy evening, and then we'd have an excuse to have a lot of people join us in our Zoom meeting. But I think it turned out to be a lovely evening. So I hope people are outside. But thank you for coming and joining us. I want to welcome you. We're going to be talking about Walsh Playground today. And I do apologize. I'm filling in for Amy Linnae, who is the project manager, who unfortunately was feeling too under the weather to be able to lead this today. So I'm filling in for her. So I'm not as familiar with a lot of the details as she is, but I'll try to do my best to get us through today. And I'm joined by Tiffany Caballero, who is our community outreach coordinator. So thank you, Tiffany, for coming. I'm not even sure if we have a slide about interpretation, but we do have interpretation services available. Oh, thank you. We do have interpretation services available tonight if you need Spanish or Haitian Creole or Vietnamese interpretations. Those are available. I'm going to allow each interpreter to introduce themselves. So Emily, if you wouldn't mind going first. And I don't think we can hear you, Emily. Maybe that's just me.
She just put in the chat that she's not able to once she's in the room.
Oh, okay. Okay, so there are instructions in each language on this screen. So if you're looking for the little globe icon, the circle, and you can select the audio channel of the language that you would like to have interpretation services for. So thank you all to Emily and to An and to Esther for joining us tonight and providing these services so that everyone can join. This meeting is being recorded. We will be posting the recording on our project website. So if you're not comfortable being videoed, you can keep your video off, and if you wouldn't mind keeping your microphone muted until we ask for you to be called on, just to try to keep the background noise to a minimum. Just a little bit of etiquette. We want to make sure that everyone's having an equal voice to be able to speak and share their comments and feedback and questions. So if we can please be respectful of each other's time, limit the comments to a couple of minutes, and so that everybody can participate. I will try to prioritize people who we haven't heard from before those who want to make second comments as we go. And you can always contact Amy for additional questions if there's something that you're not comfortable saying in a public forum, or if you have a more specific question that comes up after the fact. Amy Linnae is the project manager. Amy.Linnae, Linne @boston.gov is always available to you. So again, just if you don't mind keeping your microphone muted unless you're making a comment, and you can turn your cameras off. We do appreciate seeing your faces. It's always better to see a face than a blank screen, but we understand that people's level of comfort is different, or they're maybe unsafe to do so. So just do whatever is comfortable for you. And we will, when we get through the bulk of our presentation, we'll be asking people to raise their hand for videos, for comments, sorry. So we're gonna go through a bit of the introduction of the project team, talk a bit about the overall project, what the scope of the work that we're looking at, some of the project timelines, get into a site analysis of what we see as designers when we go out to the site, problems we see, but then we really want to hear from you. What works, what doesn't work, what kinds of things would you like to see in this park? How could you what do you really enjoy using? What is missing at this park that we may want to consider? And then we'll talk about what the next steps are at the end. So again, my name is Kathy Baker Eclipse. I'm the director of the capital plan. I work with Amy. She is the main contact for this for the city. Tiffany Caballero is here with us today. Megan Tompkins from CBA Landscape Architects is also joining us. You're going to hear from her soon. She's also joined by Amy Foster in her office. And a couple of people who I don't know if they are here. I don't see, but if you'd like to, raise your hand and say a few words, that's fine. Eric James is the Mattapan liaison. He's a great resource for issues in broader neighborhood that maybe are not always parks. Sometimes it's streets, sometimes it's schools. He's a great way to connect to some services or just talk about other things that are going on in the neighborhood. And Ross Cochran is your Dorchester liaison, if that's your neighborhood for where you live as well. I do just want to ask if there's any representatives from any elected officials. If you're free to unmute yourself and say hello. Let me pause for a moment to allow that to happen if there's anybody who is from an elected official's office.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ayo from the Office of City Councilor Brian Worrell. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for putting this on for the community.
Thank you, Ayo. It's really great to have you here.
And Kathy, just to the point of Eric James and Ross Cochran, they both are in a butters meetings tonight. So they did email me, let me know they won't be able to attend, but they'll connect with constituents after the meeting if there are any concerns.
Great, thank you. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So this is the overall project schedule. We have a conceptual design conceptual design contract with CBA Landscape Architects that we are anticipating rolling into a full design services contract pretty soon. We're expecting some money in the next fiscal year. We're also going to be applying for a grant for this site to the park grant, which is a state grant that gives us some leverage for some additional funds. There are some timelines that are associated with that grant. So something that is largely driving the construction and completion dates at the end of the timeline. But it's a really great way to leverage some objectives that the city wants to do and some objectives that the state wants to meet and be able to have make some real improvements in the community in a pretty accelerated timeline. So we're anticipating that's going to be filed in early July. We would like to come back out in late summer to talk about a couple of design alternatives based on what we hear tonight. And then in the fall, come back again with a final consensus plan based on how we feel about each of those two plans, what we liked in this plan, what we didn't like in that plan, what we want, what's missing. So come back to a third meeting in the fall to really talk about what the overall vision for the park is, and then start developing bid documents from that feedback that we hear at that third community meeting. The grant would require us to be completed by about a month ago, by around the beginning of June 2025. So that means we really need to start construction as soon as possible. So right around July 1, 2024. So we want to give ourselves as much time to complete the construction project as possible, which means we need to wrap up the bid documents pretty quickly and aggressively. This is all doable. We do grants like these every year, and this schedule is doable and achievable. So currently only the conceptual design is funded, but we're anticipating that there is funding in the FY24 budget for that doing the design and then rolling into the construction in 2020 fiscal 25, which starts July 1, 2024. All right, so when we're thinking about park design as a whole, there are a lot of pieces that we are considering. We're thinking about what the City of Boston priorities are, creating family-friendly spaces, creating a green city. We're thinking about goals that the department has, how to create flexible spaces. We're going to get into each of those a little bit more in a minute. There's also safety and regulatory guidelines, especially around playgrounds. There are, and some accessibility, there are federal statutes that we need to adhere to. And the community input is a really important piece of that as well. So we want to bring all of those priorities together and they contribute to the overall park design. So, so those are all the things we're thinking about and trying to ask our designers to bring all together, synthesize into one plan that incorporates all of these all together. So some of these City of Boston priorities, expanding walkable access to parks. We were really proud that we were the first city on the East Coast to be within a 10-minute walk of every resident within a 10-minute walk of a park. And we also are thinking about how can we address an equitable distribution of our assets throughout the city. We're also thinking about climate resilience, how we can create cooling spaces throughout our parks, how we can create a green city, one that is thriving and family friendly, one that creates a healthy environment for families to be raised in, and how do we leverage this this open space system that we have to create healthy communities and affordable housing so that families and everybody can stay in the city. Within the Parks Department, if we can go to the next slide, we would like to have, we really prioritize creating an accessible park that is available to everyone with a diverse and balanced and efficient mix of uses. So that means that we'd like to have some multifunctional spaces, multifunctional fields, some courts that can play dual uses. So trying to balance all these things so that everybody can have as best a chance of getting what they need and what they're looking for in our parks. We have a limited amount of space, but a lot of demands on that space. We also really value having a meaningful and inclusive community engagement, and that's why we're here tonight. We want to hear from you what you would like to see in this space. That is really important for us. We find that communities that feel invested in their spaces take care of their spaces, and really there's a tremendous value that is gained by having these conversations. We're also trying to provide adaptive and resilient landscapes as the environment changes. How can our open space adapt as well to this changing environment that we're in? We also want to promote connections between neighbors, between neighborhoods, promote connections to the park, to the surrounding areas. So these are some of the overall goals that we're thinking about as well. Next slide. I think this, so this is a little bit of where we are in space. Megan, do you want to take it over from here?
Sure, yes. Yeah, this is where I start. Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Tompkins. I'm a principal at CBA Landscape Architects. We're a small landscape architecture firm that designs quite a few parks and playgrounds within Boston and around the greater Boston area. We do other types of design as well. And with me, I have Amy Foster, who is a landscape architect, and she'll be speaking about some parts of this design later on in the presentation. So I'd like to start by talking about context, and we usually start with sort of a zoomed out neighborhood context. We like to look at the entire neighborhood around the park in question, and we look at it a few different ways, but a lot of it is about what's within walking distance. So we consider a quarter-mile radius about a 5 to 10 minute walk, and a half-mile radius walking distance about a 10 to 15 minute walk. So these are things that are close to the park that are significant in some way, like they may be a school, community center, church, other park, you know, that may have some bearing on the community and or the park. And from our perspective as designers, we like to look at this so we can understand, you know, sort of the community and the community better, and understand how the park fits into the neighborhood. Yes, so I'll also sort of move on to looking at a little bit more of a zoomed in version of this, but as you can see, there are quite a few parks nearby. I also understand sort of Lower Mills Center is right there. So there are a lot of resources, but there's also a lot of residential area near Walsh Playground. All right. And we also looked at these sort of the immediate surroundings. Amy and I have visited the park. I'd actually been to the park several times on my own because I live fairly nearby. So I've been there, you know, with my daughter. But we recognize that it's a pretty big urban park. Its immediate surroundings are mostly residential. It has 2 street frontages, both Washington Street, Clancy Road, and then there's also 2 official entrances, and I understand there's also 2 breaks in the fence that serve as park entrances at the top of the hill corners on Clancy. Yeah, and so it's sort of a 50-50 mix of street frontage and the back of residential properties. So there's a good mix here. All right, and I am going to hand the presentation over to, I'm going to let Amy Foster talk about sort of existing conditions, what's at the park currently, and what we've observed already.
Yeah, hi everyone. So like Megan said, we put together this base diagram of the existing conditions, which helps us kind of evaluate what's there already, what's working for us, what needs improvement, and what do we want to change. So I can breeze through this slide pretty quickly because we'll break it down in more detail in the next couple slides. But generally, we have our park. We're mostly enclosed with chain link fencing. We have multiple sport programs. We have a playground, and we have interesting topography and vegetation. So I'll expand on that, kind of starting with the next slide a little more. We have our 2 softball diamonds, which I would describe as being kind of a usable condition, but with a lot of room for improvement and a lot of areas in which they could be renovated if that's a community priority. We also understand that the outfield lawns of the softball fields are used for other sport field uses. And so as we look to potentially renovate the lawn or add walkways, we would definitely remain mindful of the multiple sport uses that go on in that open lawn area. We also have the hard courts, tennis and basketball. I understand the basketball court is well used and in fairly good condition, but maybe could use a refresh. The tennis court is a bit more cracked, which is difficult for playing tennis on, and it's definitely an area we're looking for community input on whether or not tennis is a desirable use for this space, if there would be alternate desirable uses for this hard court space, and kind of target that area as a question mark for the community. We also have the memorial flag at the main entrance along Washington Street, which is named after William G. Walsh, for whom the park is named, and we would remain respectful of that. And then we have our playground area, which in addition to the swing set, we kind of call that playground structure a traditional post and platform playground. And I think by our kind of current ideas about ideal playgrounds, we would maybe be looking to add some more diverse play opportunities from what is offered from the traditional post and platform in addition to that. So we've kind of targeted that as an opportunity for improvement as well. Then we looked at circulation for the site, which is very straightforward because there's really just one main path that goes through the site. It's not in kind of hazardous condition, but it maybe needs a revamp. The asphalt's kind of crumbling on edges and there's some puddling on the path where it's settled. Along that one main path, we're connecting the 2 entrances, as Megan introduced, the one along Washington Street, which offers pedestrian access as well as maintenance vehicle access, and then kind of the secondary outlet entrance that goes to Pleasant Hill Terrace. And as Megan said, we do have two more maybe unofficial or informal entrances in fence openings along Clancy Road, which are not universally accessible entrances, but maybe a shortcut through some sloping steep lawn where there's an opening in the fence. And then we have our playground pathways, which kind of encircle the playground area. And we consider that wood fiber surface to not be a universally accessible surface for all people to walk across. So that again is kind of maybe an area we've targeted for improvement where we can improve access there. We've also had a look at just quickly inventorying the site furniture. It's pretty simple and straightforward. We want to have seating around our program areas. We like to have seating in the shade where possible, which is kind of the current configuration. As we look to make replacements, we might want to think about benches that are a little bit more supportive with armrests and backs on the benches. And probably look at upgrading our trash receptacles. And we would certainly look at placing those in places that are convenient for the users and also convenient from a maintenance and logistics perspective. And along with that, I think goes the portable toilets. We also would want to consider the needs for equipment storage, as we've kind of observed multiple temporary storage containers on the site. And then have a deeper look at how the utilities are working on the site, including the utility cabinet and the lighting that's currently on the basketball court. And then to wrap up kind of our existing conditions analysis, we want to briefly talk about the natural features, vegetation, and topography of the site. We have some nice mature canopy trees existing, which we consider ourselves very lucky to have those existing on a site. They provide shade, they provide screening, they provide character and habitat. So while some trees show damage and we might want to look at some selective removals or maybe invasive species removals or some selective understory clearing, for the most part, we kind of consider this wooded edge in the shade from the trees to be an asset to the site that we would like to maintain and take advantage of where we can. We also have some significant slopes surrounding the softball fields especially, and this kind of gives the site a little bit of character and personality too. From a design perspective, it is also kind of a constraining factor because we can't always get accessible walkways everywhere we want when we have such a steep slope, but it's something we'll remain mindful of. And then similarly, we have some rock outcroppings, which I think are really great, and we'll want to have those inventoried so we can work around them when we're placing our design features on the site.
All right. Thanks, Amy. I think that was pretty comprehensive, but we welcome discussion later on when we have a discussion period. We look forward to hearing what everyone thinks of sort of the assets and constraints of the site as it is. So we have looked at several sort of batches of potential precedent images for potential improvements to the park. We know the existing playground is very well used. We know the ball fields are very well used. But then there's, of course, some other things that we have questions about that, you know, we'll ask about, and we'll hope to get some feedback from you all later on. One thing I'll start with is playgrounds. So usually when we talk about playgrounds as a you know, designer, playgrounds are typically sort of designed for two separate age groups. So it'll be ages 2 to 5 and 5 to 12. And there's a lot of sort of overlap in the design style, although I will say that typically, you know, things that are designed for 2 to 5-year-olds are smaller, the fall heights are lower, the risk factor is a little lower. I'm sure that makes sense to everyone. And I should also say, while I'm talking about this sort of age group breakdown, is that there are some things that are technically geared towards all ages, you know, 2 to 12 or 2 to, you know, 2 to whatever age, 2 to adult. And that tends to be things like swings and other sort of group activities, musical instruments, things like that. So just quickly, we've included a few slides of play structures, examples from past projects that are geared towards the younger age group. As you can see, lower, closer to the ground. They can still have challenging elements, and they can have some really great interactive elements. And another thing that we often think about when we're designing stuff like this, especially I think for little kids, is things with themes or interactive panels that, you know, that are a little educational, but also fun. All right. And so we've also included a batch of images for of play structures for that older group. As you can see, the structures are taller, the challenges are a little more so. And, you know, this sort of perception of risk is maybe a little higher, whether it actually is or not. It's not. These things are, you know, whether it actually is or not is maybe up for grabs. But it is generally a newer play structure, is very safe. One of the things that we did not explicitly address in this presentation is that we almost always install this kind of rubber like play surface under new play structures. I think the city of Boston is doing that as a matter of course. So it would not be wood chips. It would be like the surfaces that you see here under the play structures. It would be a unitary rubber surface for safety. So that in and of itself makes the new playground safer. Another thing that I'd like to point out with this particular batch of play structures is shade. I know Amy mentioned shade because there's some great trees on this site, but more and more we're getting requests for shade to be incorporated into the actual structures, or as like a little pavilion structure near the playgrounds, for picnicking or resting, for caregivers resting. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and we will, we can talk about that later if it's interesting. All right. Another thing that Amy had touched on earlier in the site analysis portion of the program is inclusive and sort of universal design. So one of the things that we're always thinking about when we're designing a new playground is can everyone use it? Is this accessible to everyone? And that both means accessibility, ADA accessible routes, but it's also can everyone be included? So some of these elements that you see here, the group spinner, the dish swing, the friendship swing, that's the swing with sort of two swings together, can be used by a group of children cooperatively. It makes this sort of barrier of entry to play lower for kids that maybe have disabilities. Things like the dish swing, a kid with lower mobility can be on the dish swing and enjoying themselves while their kids push, or other kids are on there and other kids are pushing. It can be a lot of fun and pretty inclusive. And of course, the musical instruments are also a great addition to parks that everyone can use. And the ones that we install at parks these days are tuned pretty nicely, and they usually sound really nice. All right. Another thing that I know that we have been talking about for Walsh Playground is a splash pad. Currently, Walsh does not have water service. So there is not a drinking fountain. There is no splash pad. I know the city has been talking about reducing heat island effect in parks generally. And this of course means, you know, shade and trees, but it also means this opportunity to cool off in the summer. So adding a splash pad would be a great opportunity to sort of work towards that. I also know that the splash pads in the city are typically only open from, you know, June to September. And that leaves 10 months of the year that they're not on. So often we design them with flush sprays, so the, you know, paved area can be used for other uses those other 10 months, you know, bikes, trikes, picnics, all of those things. So that would be something we can also discuss and talk about, you know, further on. All right. So the sports program at Walsh is pretty comprehensive currently. So I know we have those two softball / little league size diamonds with overlapping outfields. I'm curious to hear how those are used because I'm guessing they're pretty well used and pretty well permitted like every little league and softball field in the city. I know there's a tennis court that has lights. And I know there is a basketball court. And then there's a tennis court next to it. The basketball court has lights. And I know that the, you know, the outfield area is used for other things. So I think it's going to be interesting to hear, you know, what you as the community is interested in seeing, you know, for this new sports program. I'm guessing new backstops maybe on the list. But it seems like there's also, you know, potential for other uses in this park. There's a kind of a big flat area that's shady that could be a picnic grove, like that that lower photo there with the picnic tables and the trees. And there might be opportunity for like an interior walking loop that loops around the ball fields. I guess we'll find out. I'm you know, very curious to hear how that to hear what you all think about that. And that brings me to the next slide, which is path materials and wayfinding. So I know currently the paths, there's sort of one main path on site. I don't know if this path is used as a cut through. And there's also not, like, I know there's sports lights at the basketball court, and I know there are lights overhanging the park from Clancy Road that look like they're attached to street lighting poles. But aside from that, there isn't lighting in the park. So I don't know if that is something, you know, that would make the park feel safer for folks, or if it's not a desired element. And aside from that, you know, things like a loop path would you know, adults or teens want to exercise, you know, want to come to the park and walk and listen to a podcast and walk around the loop. I don't know. And, you know, I think if this park is getting a splash pad, a drinking fountain is a no-brainer, especially with those, you know, 2 little league / softball fields. And then, like Amy mentioned, you know, new benches, new picnic tables, trash cans. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement here. Another thing that we often talk about when we're doing a park design is sort of entry sequence. So I know this park has, you know, the flagpole, the Walsh Memorial, the planting bed that looks nicely taken care of. Sometimes we add things like the metal column shown here, you know, at entryways, or a metal arch at entryways. I'm not sure how that would work if this is also the vehicular entrance, but the columns might be a more, you know, accessible idea. And then is there a need for wayfinding? That small granite post on the side is a image from a park in Mission Hill that's large, and you know, it just helps folks who are walking the walking path know where they're going. So, all of that said, I think that is the end of sort of the neighborhood context, the, site context, and the sort of precedent ideas that we've brought to you today. At this point, we'd like to open it up for discussion. Actually, I'll just leave the discussion sheet up and we'll get to the sort of final slide afterwards. Yeah, I guess, Kathy, do you need to say anything at this point?
I was just gonna ask if we could maybe put up one of the site plans to talk to, which might be a little bit more evocative than
Thank you.
what we have. But yeah, so I think so I'm just gonna briefly recap what I said at the beginning. If you'd like to make a comment, we welcome it. We really need your input. And if you can raise your hand, and then I don't know whether we can, if we need to allow you to unmute yourself or whether you can just automatically unmute yourself to start. So I can start with reading a couple of the comments that came in on the chat during the presentation. Thank you, Megan, so much. And thank you, Amy. Maggie said, I love that xylophone and the idea of a splash pad and drinking fountain. And that was applauded, agreed to by someone else. Marie said that the lights aren't used. I think that's the lights on the basketball court. And we can investigate whether that is because they're not usable, whether there's some circuitry issues or whether it is something else, whether it's just there's not demand for it. Maggie also said that the outfield is often used by dog owners, and that is something that we see at parks across the city. So that is not unusual. And dogs on leashes are required at this park. That those signs should be at the entrances. Marie said, yes, please. And I think that was in response to the lighting. And usable water bottle usable fountains preferred. That is usually our standard when we have athletic uses are those water bottle fillers. Usually one that has both a bottle filler and so that somebody can come up to it and drink straight from it if they forgot their water bottle. But both of those, that is our standard fixture when we have athletic uses. I'm looking to see, I don't need to cut anybody else if they'd like, can you cut anybody else off if they'd like to unmute themselves, but so I will. So Anton, if you would like to go ahead and unmute yourself, I think.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm one of the neighbors that live on Washington Street. We directly abut the park, so we'd use it and see it literally every single day and every night. So there are some areas that you have highlighted there for existing conditions. And I fully appreciate needing to, retain as much of the landscaping or large trees and things that have been there for a long time. I just wanted to mention that in the area that you have cited as rock outcroppings in the lower right-hand corner.
Yep.
So that area goes pretty much unused year round. And in fact, it becomes kind of a dump for trash and things like that. It's not an area that from a topography standpoint is able to be maintained, it seems. It's very steep heading towards the fence. And so that might be an area, I don't know if leveling some of the area, there's granite underneath there. There's like ledgestone, I should say, underneath there. So it's not impossible feat, but it's a feat, right? But that might be an opportunity to put something else in that space. And also in the left area where you say woodland edge, grass slope, that's also an area that doesn't get much use. Because there's trash there now. It stays there and it's been there for some years. So I don't know if regrading is an opportunity for this park. I think that's going to be necessary to achieve some of the goals, like for the softball park and expanding the use of the open area, especially if and I think it's a great idea to have like a walking perimeter, something that folks can do a lap around. People do now. It's just challenging to do so with some of the topography being very steep at almost every corner there. So those are just a few thoughts that I had. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Tony, would you like to unmute yourself? Tony? Oh,
Hey, Kathy, Tony Ardolino. I'm a resident of the Mattapan, Dorchester area, as well as the commissioner for the Boston Flag Football League, which is an LGBTQ-based flag football league in Boston. So we use those fields for the spring and fall season. And typically what we do is we are able to squeeze 3 football fields in between those 2 softball fields and grass area that are 75 yards by 30 yards. So would have a little bit of concern on how the pathway, if it were to go in between the fields or anything like that, that would potentially be a concern on our end. But I think in general, some concerns that are general that we've heard from our league members. I'm sure you notice there's a lot of grates and metal drainage on the field. I have no idea what the technology is for drainage nowadays, but being able to potentially look at different ways for the fields to be able to drain would be helpful. I think from a safety perspective, we see a lot of we put cones around the grates to try to protect our players, but when you're running full speed, sometimes they run into them and slip and fall and potentially injure themselves. Additionally, I know you've probably also noticed the field isn't exactly level. So if there's any considerations for the leveling of the field to make it more safe when running around. And then lastly, I agree with the water. Some of our players have asked if there are any water facilities on site, which there currently are not. So those are some things that we would have for our considerations. And then as a resident living nearby the fields, curious if, I know we talked a lot about there being dogs there, and curious if there's any considerations for dog park usage for the park at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything's on the table at this point, so it's something we will investigate moving forward. So yeah. Renee, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, how are you? So I am a Clancy Road resident, so right there. And I have to say, Tony, the football group is like the best group that comes to use the field, so they probably also have the best idea of what would be great for field usage. But I think a splash pad would be really well liked. And I also agree with like the rock outcropping area and those other areas. They kind of just end up being a place where people end up going to do drugs, and you find stuff up there sometimes. So if there was a better use of that space, that would be excellent. Maybe one of those spots would be good for like a dog park or something. And then also the lighting at night, I think would bring like, I don't love that idea, but I know that the other people on my street agree with that, but and then I don't know how you would incorporate keeping the field as big as it is, but having some sort of walking path would be great, because I know we have a bunch of older residents that do walks around the park daily. And if they had a more level, kind of safe area, I think that they would appreciate that a lot. So,
Yeah.
That's it. Excited about this.
Yeah, the walking path is something that is really a multi-generational use that's adding. It's great for adults of all ages who are looking to just walk, provide some clarification about where fields are, where fields are not. So if you stay on the path, you're probably outside the field of play. And it also addresses a otherwise very hard to meet demographic for active recreation, which is teen girls. Teen girls tend to use walking paths when they as recreational activities. They don't tend to as a group tend to use basketball or fields, but they will use walking paths. That's not to say that there's not tremendous value in providing programming for those, but that is traditionally underserved demographic in parks.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I was actually just thinking, it's kind of hard to teach kids how to like ride bikes. So if there was like that path, it'd be great for learning
Yeah.
how to ride
Yeah,
bikes.
that's another great reason to have a walking loop, a circulation loop. Yeah.
Thank
you. Yeah, and the lighting, I'll just touch on just for a second, and I think we're going to look into all of these. The lighting is kind of a chicken and egg, right? If you don't have lighting, people don't go there at night. You're not creating a space that is going to feel welcoming at night, so people won't tend to go there when there's not lighting. But it also could create dark spots, which can make the space feel less safe. So it's a bit of a balancing those two somewhat at odds elements together to try to increase. But it's certainly not the only tool that we have to try to increase safety. So it's just something we're gonna think about and bring something back to talk about further. So I'm going to ask Katie and Desmond Goldring to unmute themselves and to see if Ann Walsh in the chat said that softball fields are very well used and would be even more used if drainage can be improved, especially around home plate, that a bottle filler would be great. So Katie and Desmond, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. I agree with a lot of what has already been said. A few things I want to point out are that the park is not just used in the summer, spring, and fall. It's also pretty heavily used in the winter for sledding. And so some of the areas that were mentioned as being unused, I would agree they are full of trash and also can attract folks to do things that are whatever. They are used for sledding. So like, I think the shaded lawn area that was mentioned on the lower left and the grass slope, those are heavily utilized for that in the winter. And I personally think it's nice to have various different options for different age kids. Some kids are afraid of the really big hill and others, aren't. So that to me is a value. I think somebody put in the chat about plans for maintenance and upkeep once it's completed. And I think that's important. And I love the fact that your pictures of the existing playground showed the huge piles of mulch that never gets spread when they are added to the playground. And I'm glad to hear that they're going to be putting something besides mulch down there. Some other things that I know I would echo the idea. We would love to have a splash pad, would be great. Something I wanted to mention is you were talking about invasives. There's a lot of poison ivy down there. I think that, you were asking about the tennis court and whether it's used. I think I know it isn't used much now. I don't know if it was in better condition, if it would be used. Currently, there's like a chain link fence as the net. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of cracks in it. So I don't know if there's a way to have a tennis court be a multi-use kind of a surface, but I like the idea of having a tennis court just because I think tennis is a great sport and I'd like people to have access to a nice tennis court. The tennis court we have right now is not something that anybody who probably really plays tennis is ever going to play on. I'm concerned, I like the idea of the walking route, but I'm concerned about adding a lot of pavement to the natural setting. I really value grass and trees and rocks. And so I just asked that there's, some attention put to that since that's so bad for the environment. And then I was hoping that there would be a spot for a community garden because I think that there are limited grocery stores in this area. And I think that I notice a lot of my neighbors have gardens in the 3 feet next to their house. And so I think there would probably be a lot of interest in getting to have a community garden spot. And there could even be something like with potentially with terracing, in making a community garden. I think there's definitely sunny areas. I think it's just a matter of how it all goes together. And then I have no opinion about the lights. I get that people don't really want a lot of lights in their front yard. I don't ever go down to the park at night, so I don't really care if there's lights or not. I really like the idea of the picnic tables. And sorry, I think there's one other thing which I feel like even though there are a lot of trees in the park itself, there aren't really a lot of trees in the neighborhood in general. And sorry. And so I was wondering, like, from like a landscape architect's perspective, I was thinking that it would be helpful to have a bunch of, Desmond, honey, can you just lower the volume a tiny bit? Thank you. To have some trees along the top of the hill on Clancy Road inside the fence. I think there's some erosion because a lot of people work out there, which I think is great, and they run up the hill, but there's like some dirt paths and stuff that have gotten kind of ground into the hill. And so I didn't know if like some trees at the top might be helpful. And there's one. Desmond, honey, can you lower your volume, please? I'm almost done. And sorry, I'm gonna wrap up. So I like trees, so I would love to see some trees up there. Thank you so much. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm done, honey. Whoops, I gotta mute myself.
Okay. Deborah, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
So I was Megan, if I got your name, is it Megan?
I'm Megan.
Okay, so did you
Yep.
state that you had come through the park on several occasions?
Yes, yes. I
Did you
live
talk to
near-
any of the park participants when you came through, the neighborhood people that were in the park, or were there no people in the park?
So I have talked to people at different times in the park, but not explicitly about designing the park. If that's helpful. I wasn't in there, I was just in there as a user, not as a designer.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just hoping that you might have had face-to-face conversation with the people that were in the park. And the other thing I was considering is that I really think the playground users of the park should have a platform, meaning the children,
Mm-hmm.
and that there should be some conversation for them and with them. And is that something that's possible?
I mean, I would absolutely love to do, a meeting or a pop-in or something at the park so we can catch users and talk about the playgrounds.
Because I figure they're your park also, especially the basketball court, the kids that play basketball in the court area, what their needs are over there, and having conversations with them, the likelihood for them to get on a Zoom and have a conversation with you on a Zoom is little to none, I'm thinking. So some real interaction, some foot interaction with the people who actually use the park.
I completely agree. Yep.
Yeah, Deborah, that's a great suggestion. Is there a time of day or a time of the week that's very heavily used for both the basketball and the playground, and they don't have to be the same times of day?
Time of day would be about this time of day.
Okay.
It's usually either when the kids get out of camp and or if school is still in and when they're out of school.
Okay.
So yeah, most of the time, and they're there till dusk because there is no lighting.
Because there's no lighting.
I'm going
Yeah.
to the lighting, and I understand everybody's phobia around the lighting. But again, the kids, I don't know. I live on Pleasant Hill Avenue. I've lived on the street for quite some time. The kids that go to that park normally go there with a focus, and that is to play basketball. And I believe if they had longer time in that park to play basketball, even if the lights went off at 9 o'clock at night, so they could still have that engagement time while they're there. But again, like I said, if you come to the park when they're there and you have the conversation with them, you would better, they could better tell you themselves what their needs are.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a great.
I'm sorry, and there's one last thing.
Sure.
It's the trees. I know that people are, all, gung ho about the trees, but the trees do need to be trimmed back tremendously because it causes it to be dark in there in the daytime. So we can get some tree trimming so we can let some natural lighting in. That'd be awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Anne, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Sure, yeah, hi. I loved all those ideas that Deborah just shared. So, and I was thinking about your target audience that you spoke of earlier, teen girls. So I am here as a coach. I live in Lower Mills, so I use Walsh Park for sledding a lot in the winter. So I agree with the sledding need. But I'm here today as a coach for all Dorchester sports and leadership and a softball coach. So we use the park. I coach teen girls ages 13 to 18, and we use the park for that. And so we want to make sure that softball is a sort of protected use and that we continue to have access. Finding softball fields that are well cared for is actually pretty difficult in the community versus baseball fields. So even when you called it like Little League / softball, I was like I need it to be a softball field. Like it cannot have a mound put on. It needs to like have the distances and the care for softball because there's just not as many softball diamonds as Little League baseball spaces. So the dirt infield is important. And I understand like the younger Little Leaguers can use that same space, and that's great. Because I know there's like a church league that uses it on weekend, and they use it for the little guys, and that makes sense as well. Yeah, the backstop is the biggest issue in terms of every pass ball like goes into the wilderness, right? Because there's just so much growth there, and the fencing in front of the benches and the benches themselves need to be replaced. But getting the vegetation out around the back of the backstop on the interior side so that when a ball goes, it just hits the backstop and it's not caught up in any vegetation. And then the first base side bench, like by the end of the summer, is kind of in the wilderness a lot because the high grass starts to come down. So if there's a way to sort of just demarcate that, like I don't know much about what you do, but like creating a more designated, like this is the bench area, this is nature, and never the twain shall meet, that would be great. There isn't really a safe, there's some safe area for folks to like put chairs under the trees on the third base side, but because of the slope, it's a little up and down. Like if grandparents are coming and such, it's tough for them to find like a safe spot to sit. So having benches for maybe some, I don't think like bleachers, but even having a few benches on the sides of the softball field in places that then elders or spectators can watch the games without sort of perching on chairs on unsteady ground, that would be really appreciated from that perspective. And I don't know if you're doing any regrading, but the only reason we don't use that field more is because it floods badly. So if there's, especially right around home plate. So if there's any regrading work happening, then, paying some attention to the drainage around home plate would make the diamond far more usable. We have to cancel games there quite a bit because of drainage. And so, and parks have done an incredible job the last 2 years, especially in really setting the field up to be played on. Like they are dragging the field regularly, they're lining the field, they're redoing the surface. If there was water in the park, then they would be able to keep the field in a little bit better condition, because in the summer it gets really dry, and then literally like kids are fielding a ground ball and getting like a fistful of dirt with them with the ball, and they're throwing the ball and there's like a cloud around them. So if they had if parks had a way to spray down the field lightly, that would really do a lot for the quality of play as well. And I love the flag football team league because they're like so community minded, and The struggle is that because of the patterns of play of flag football, they create a lot of wear and tear on the outfield. So even if there was just like one softball diamond where the outfield was sort of better maintained as like the primary softball diamond, we really only use the diamond closer to Mount Pleasant if there's like a practice going same time. But predominantly the diamond on Washington Street is the one that Boston Public Schools high school teams use, and that ADSL tends to use more. So littler kids or practices might happen on the back end, but if there's ways to use the space strategically so that the Washington Street outfield is a little less, suffers a little less wear and tear, that would make it go from a good diamond to a really excellent field.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.
And that you answered my question, which was going to be which do you consider to be the primary field? So it's good to know that you prefer the west one. So thank you so much. Virginia,
the west one, the Washington Street one, which I think maybe my compass points are off, but the Washington Street one is definitely the more used diamond.
But you were talking about the one you used, the one on the west, towards the Pleasant Hill Ave.
No, the Washington Street
Oh,
side.
you use the Washington. Okay.
Yes, and Boston Public Schools also, their high school games are on the Washington Street.
Okay.
So the one on Pleasant Hill, that's used more for practice or with the little guys on the weekends.
Okay.
Ball in the church league, they tend to put their littler guys back there.
Okay. I thought when you're talking about the wilderness, you're talking about the wilderness between Pleasant Hill Ave and the
No, just up on the hill and like around the backstop, all the grass and the plants really grow in. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. I think, I'm not sure if Marie or Virginia were next. I thought these were in order. So I'm going to ask Virginia to unmute yourself, and then we'll have Marie.
Hi, thank you so much. So first of all, I came really late, and so I wanted to know if there's going to be another meeting about this and when, because I did miss probably a large chunk of this meeting.
Yeah. That's okay. And the meeting's also being recorded, so you can go back and you can catch up on what we talked about in the beginning. If there's any community comments or part of the presentation that you want to go back to, it is going to be on the project website. And this is the first of a series of meetings. We're going to have another meeting to talk about design alternatives in around September, and then the third meeting to present the final consensus plan later in the fall. So, and I think having some pop-ups in the park and really engaging, especially kids that are using the park is a great idea. So there may be some news about that. I'll leave that to the project manager. I'm not the project manager, but so I'll let her first figure that out. So.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a great idea about getting information, because I live on St. Gregory. Actually, I think my house is pictured here on the house saying some trees show damage. And I have to say, I just removed a huge branch from a tree that is in the park that was falling into my yard. And so behind our yard, they usually don't pick up any of the dead branches that are there. And I would so I don't know, I can't speak to all of your things, but I would appreciate more trees that are aligning the houses that about the that are from St. Gregory Street, just for privacy, especially during the summer when people are having either school outings, sort of block the noise. Oh, I didn't see the other picture. I agree, though. I really like to keep it open space with trees. I'm not sure. It seemed like there was a lot going on. And I wanted to second, my daughter is on Anne's team, and we're there a lot, and it's a terrible place as a parent to watch a game. And I think that, I know you had mentioned something about walking paths for girls, but I think girls would do more organized sports if they got to see girls doing more organized sports in the city. And so I think in a place like Walsh Park, where it's visible from the street, we could actually recruit more girls if we could play there more often. And it's a great place to sled. And so I hope the things for sledding do not go away. I mean, we've all chosen to live in the city, and I don't want the parts of being in an urban place to be removed from that. And I think part of that is having a multi-use place and having some places that are exploratory. So I understand that people might be doing unsavory things at that up in the rocks, but my kids loved kind of exploring and imaginative in that area as well. And I think upkeep has a lot to do with it. Usually it's pretty well upkept for me. We utilize every inch of that park in the 18 years I've lived there raising my 3 children. But I have to say the tennis courts are terrible, even though, my kids go to Tenacity. We've all played tennis, but it's a tough court. Like somebody had mentioned, there's always debris that's not cleaned up. It's not a great fence. So I would, love some work there. I think they should be kept there. And then I guess I have to read the rest to provide more feedback. But, my daughter is a big believer that a lot of the renovations to the playground areas have not been great for kids, and they've made them actually less fun. And so I'd really, if any changes to the playground area, really have a lot of input from children, because some of the renovations in these parks in Dorchester, because we used to, tour all of them to be creative. My kids have been actually downgrades rather than upgrades, even though they've been newer. They've found most of them less fun. So I hope that you do get some input from kids.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, we'll work on that. Thank you. Marie?
Hi. I just wanted to double down on the lights for the park. I think Deborah Smith is my mom. I think my mom is right in that talking to the kids on the basketball court is the way to do that. My son is a 10-year-old. He plays on that court all the time. He's likened that court to a barbershop. And if you guys know what a Black barbershop means, it's a community building space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to make sure to preserve that. And right now it's cool to not have lights because it stays longer. The light is the sunlight is out longer, but when the fall comes, it's nice to have a little bit of light around 6 o'clock. So then that way the boys can have a little bit more stretch, or people can have a little more stretch at the park or on the basketball courts. And I think for anyone who is nervous about the lights being on down there, I would say go and talk to the kids down there. They're really sweet, and they take good care of each other. And so I think the more community we can create, that's where the safety comes. It's not like lighted space or things like that. It's about making sure we're talking to each other and we're creating a lot of community. So that's what I have to offer. Lights and water bottles.
Water bottles. Thank you so
Splash
much.
pad, all those good things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy, I have a quick question. Could we ask folks for email addresses for a list?
It's been a while. I think, Tiffany, can you confirm that we have captured email addresses of people who have registered? Because we asked for email addresses.
Yes, I can speak to that. So everyone who joined us for this meeting tonight should have been asked to pre-register before actually getting into the waiting room. And I can confirm that as the meeting continues on, but at our peak, we had about 23 people. And it looks like they were all captured in the registration portion of the meeting. So we can make sure to add those to any email blast or list that we have created for this park design.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So if you have left us a real email address when you signed in, which I realize is not always the case, but if you've left us a real email address, we're going to add you to our project mailing list so that you get notified of when the next meeting is. I just want to read some of the comments, mostly for record for those who may be watching later who aren't able to see the chat here. There's some concerns about picnic tables with the noise level, so I just want to make note of that. And John asked, what are the plans for maintenance and upkeep once completed? So one of the things that we are thinking about is how can we maintain this park very closely to how we maintain it today, but what are some of the maintenance challenges in the current setup, in the current design? What are some of the maintenance challenges that our team has so that we can provide the infrastructure that they need in order to maintain the space better? I think, as we're thinking about how someone is moving as a pedestrian through this, we're also thinking about how our maintenance crew is moving through this. What's going to be the easiest place for the trash to be so that can be picked up easily and doesn't get strewn all over. But it will be maintained by our maintenance staff once the park is completely open. We have been expanding our urban forestry division, so we're getting through some of our backlog and are able to maintain some of our trees better. So that is a major improvement that we are in process of making. And I think you'll see some of those improvements in the coming years.
Can I add something there? Just
yeah, absolutely.
Back off of what you said. We do heavily rely on 311. So if you have the app, you can send or you can submit photos. It's available in many languages. We actually just relaunched it not too long ago. So you can send any reports in your native language or native tongue, if you will. But we do heavily rely on those 311 reports. You can even call in if you feel more comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Tiffany. I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Paula Goldie. I live on Clancy Road. The maintenance thing to me is a real big issue because I 311 a lot on the fencing and on Clancy.
Paul, I think we lost your audio there. Is it just me?
No, it cut out a bit on me
hear
too.
me?
We can hear you now.
Oh yeah. So we look out onto it and obviously I'm like, well, this is a mess, but we couldn't even walk on the sidewalk last year because the maintenance part of like Clancy Road is never taken care of. Walsh Park Washington Street seems to be definitely more upkeep on that side. But for us, like we couldn't even get down on the little entrance we have. We couldn't even get into the park last year. So I do want to say like I have 311 in the past and I actually went on Twitter last year is how I ended up getting people to come out and do it because it was really, really bad. And we all of us on the street kind of banded together to try and get it done because people couldn't walk on the sidewalk. So that's one thing, like on our side, on like say not on our side of the street, but backing out onto the park, there's a sidewalk. They couldn't walk down that.
Was the issue weeds or was it vegetation?
Fully growing through the fence from the park like side and trees and all of that stuff. So, I'd love to say that 311 worked, Tiffany, but unfortunately it did not in that instance. I will still continue to use it if I need to. And obviously if there's any trash or anything like that, we can do that with the park and they tend to come and pick up. But when it's overgrowth, it's like, I don't know if it's like they need a landscape company to come out or how it works. I have no idea, but it seems to get forgotten on this side for sure. The hill sometimes can be forgotten. I understand the hill is really hard to mow and it needs a remote mower and it's its own set of problems. But like I said, Washington Street seems to be kept up, but we're sometimes forgotten. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm not Zoom orientated. So I apologize for just butting in. I do want to say too, sledding is huge for us. Obviously we live here, so it's easy for us to send our kids across the street, but I think it brings out all of the neighborhood too, as well. Yeah. And as much as I may not love the midnight sledders, it's still, it's a fun activity that we're living in the city that I'd like to stay for us to still have for the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that flag.
Yeah, the 311, I think that's a really good point where kind of the 311 on the maintenance and the design overlap around that vegetation issue. We can definitely make some improvements to the fence edge. A mow strip would help reduce the weeds and allow that reduce the amount of weeds growing up through that fence. So that's something that we can look at, and then makes it easier for our maintenance guys to keep up with any weeds that that's not able to suppress. So it's kind of the confluence of the two issues coming together that we can make some changes around the design through the design improvements. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and jump in, feel free. If you can't figure out how to raise your hand, that's absolutely fine. I know sometimes on a phone it's difficult. Walking loop around that extends around the top of the hill would increase walking area and also help with safety during the winter season. The community garden again is echoed. Another vote for the community garden. Someone else said that one issue with the tennis court is that its current location is under several large mature oak trees that cover the court and acorns. So that's something that we can look at, whether that's a siting issue or whether there's some pruning or all of the above. Some suggestions about how to do some additional engagement with kids as well. With regard to the flag football, the fields often gets ripped up, especially when playing in the rain or when the ground is wet. Just something to consider in terms of maintenance. So that's a great point. And so love to attend an in-person kid meeting. So we'll try to figure out how to make that happen and send out some information so that people who are already tuned into our process can bring some kids out and share with your neighbors, share with friends, so that we can all meet in the park.
I believe there's an intention to post about events like that at the park as well. Yeah. So we'll try to get that posted in advance so neighbors can see the thing and show up.
And there's some please don't cut down milkweed plants. They bring monarch butterflies. So that's an important thing to consider as we think about our urban ecoculture. Washington Street side is never maintained due to the accessibility of the rocky areas. I think I have hit most of the big points. If there's any other comments, I want to allow anybody else who would like to comment before I move on. Okay. All right. So if we can maybe move to the wrap-up slides, and we can talk about what our next meeting is. So the date for our next meeting is not yet determined, but I think we were talking about having another meeting at the end of the summer. That's right, it was the end of the summer. I think I was getting a little sliding the schedule back a little bit, but I think we wanted to try to reconvene at the end of the summer with a couple of design alternatives. Talk to some, I'm not sure about when exactly any pop-ups would happen in there, but the next meeting, we want to compare some design alternatives. What happens if we move the playground? What happens if we keep the playground where it is? And once we introduce water spray, what does that mean for all of the other pieces in the park? How do we keep the program that it has? How do we incorporate some of the things we want to add? So those are the things that CBA, Megan and her team are going to be studying in the next few weeks. So before the end of the summer, you'll be hearing back from us again. Amy will reach out with the meeting date when that is set, and then come back after Labor Day, probably late September, early October, sometime in that range, to present a consensus plan to say, we'd like this where it was, we want to move this over here. So there's some compare and contrast that we want to do, and then come back together with bring it all together. So if you have any comments or questions that you think of in the middle of the night in the shower, that's when I do my best thinking. You can email Amy Linne, Amy, AMY.Linne, LINNE @boston.gov, or you can put into 311 and it'll eventually get to Amy, but she's a great resource. She's really sorry she couldn't make it today. She's not feeling, was not up for leading this kind of great conversation that we had. And then, so I want to thank you all so much for your time, your really great thoughts. I took a lot of notes. I'm going to share them with Amy, and I know she's planning on watching this and probably is not looking forward to hearing me drone on. But I really do appreciate all of the time, all of the thoughts, and looking forward to hearing what more you have to say and this great plan that's going to come as a result of all of your thoughts and input. So thank you so much for joining us, and hope you all have a great evening. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Tiffany. Thank you, Amy. And thank you to our interpreters. Thank you so much.
Oops. Sorry. Thank you so much, Kathy. Bye. Nice to see
I hope I
everyone.
didn't speak too quickly. I'm going to stop this now.